really wanted to go. It was the second saddest day of my life, other than, losing Elvis.
The night at Graceland was as usual as Priscilla Presley sorted through old belongings when she discovered a small wooden box. Inside lay faded photographs, a keychain, and a yellowed envelope in Elvis's unmistakable handwriting, "Never sent." Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, reading the first words. "If you are reading this, it means I never found the courage to send it." Priscilla breaks down in tears. What secrets could Elvis have hidden all these years? Why was the letter never sent? Join us as we uncover the details of this secret letter Elvis never sent her. The discovery. The house was silent. Graceland, once filled with music, laughter, and the restless energy of Elvis Presley, now carried a stillness that felt almost sacred. The rooms had been preserved with care, as though time had frozen them in the last years of his life. Yet, for Priscilla, every step through the corridors carried a weight. It was not just a house to her, it was a vault of memories, both sweet and heartbreaking. On that day, she found herself alone in one of the rooms that had belonged to Elvis. The air was thick, as if holding on to something unresolved, a presence she could almost feel lingering in the corners. The quiet was heavy, almost pressing against her chest, and for a moment she thought she might turn back, but something in her urged her to keep moving. She was looking through drawers and cabinets, sorting through keepsakes, many of which had been untouched for decades. There were old photographs, faded receipts, and tiny mementos that seemed meaningless to anyone but them. Her hands brushed against the worn surface of a wooden drawer, and when she tugged, it resisted as though it had not been opened in years. Inside, tucked carefully beneath some papers, was a small envelope. Her heart stopped. She knew that handwriting instantly. It was Elvis's. The ink, though faded with age, was unmistakable. The way he shaped the letters, the slight slant in his script, she had seen it countless times on notes and letters he had written to her in the past. But this envelope was different. It was addressed to her, but bore no postage, no sign that it had ever been sent. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. The paper felt fragile, brittle from years hidden away. For a moment, she only stared at it, her heart pounding louder than the silence of the room. She wondered when he had written it. Why had he never given it to her? Why had it been hidden instead of delivered? The possibilities filled her with both dread and hope. Memories of the past flooded her mind. She thought of the letters he used to send her when he was stationed in Germany, when their love was young and full of promise. Those letters had been filled with affection and longing. They had carried a kind of light, a tenderness that reminded her of the boy she had fallen for. But this letter in her hand felt different. It felt heavier, as though it carried something he had been unable to say aloud. The question weighed on her, should she open it? Part of her feared the truth it might hold. Another part told her she had to know. This was not only about her, but about the daughter they had shared, about Lisa Marie, who was now gone. Maybe this letter held something that could bring her closer to understanding both Elvis and the life they had once shared. Her tears blurred her vision as she slid her finger beneath the fragile seal and carefully opened it. The sound of paper tearing seemed almost too loud in the stillness. She unfolded the letter slowly, almost afraid of what her eyes would meet. The first words struck her like a wave. The tone was not playful or romantic. It was solemn, almost desperate. It was as if Elvis had written not from the stage or the spotlight, but from the quiet corners of his soul. She read only a few lines before her breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook, and the paper trembled as she held it. Her tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink, but she could not stop. She realized this was not just a note. It was not casual, nor was it routine. It was a confession, written in secrecy, left unsent, and hidden away as though he could not face the weight of giving it to her. Priscilla pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by emotions she had thought she had already faced. The room seemed to close in on her, heavy with the spirit of unfinished business. She was no longer just reading a letter. She was uncovering a part of Elvis's heart that had been locked away for years. She wiped her tears and forced herself to continue, her eyes moving back to the ink. The words were pulling her back to the very beginning, to a time when their story had only just begun. The letter carried her mind to Germany, to 1959, when a young girl first met the man who would change her life forever. The early love story. It was 1959 in Wiesbaden, Germany. Priscilla Presley was only 14 years old, shy, reserved, and still adjusting to life abroad with her family. Her father, a United States Air Force officer, had been stationed there, and for Priscilla, the days often felt quiet and uneventful. That was, until she met Elvis Presley. Elvis was 24 years old at the time, serving his military duty in Germany after being drafted into the United States Army. His arrival in the country had already stirred excitement. Wherever he went, crowds gathered. Yet, for all the attention, Elvis often craved small escapes from the spotlight, places where he could feel normal, even if only for a few hours. It was during one of those escapes that Elvis and Priscilla's paths crossed. Introduced at a gathering by mutual acquaintances, she immediately felt the intensity of his presence. He was already the most famous singer in the world, yet when he looked at her, it was as if she were the only one in the room. Priscilla, still so young, was unsure of herself, but Elvis had a way of drawing her out. He spoke gently, asking about her life, making her laugh, and paying her a kind of attention she had never known. The charm that had captivated millions was now focused entirely on her. It was overwhelming, yet thrilling. In those first meetings, Elvis showered her with kindness. He was soft-spoken, patient, and protective. He invited her into his world carefully, making her feel chosen. To a young girl far from home, his attention felt like stepping into a dream. As their bond deepened, Priscilla felt both excitement and nervousness. Being connected to America's biggest star was surreal, but it also carried pressures she had never imagined. There were rules when to see him, where to go, and how to keep their meetings private. She quickly realized that being close to Elvis meant entering a life of secrecy and careful balance. Even then, she sensed there was something restless about him. For all his romance and charm, there were moments when Elvis seemed far away, lost in thoughts he never shared. His eyes, though bright when he laughed, sometimes carried a heaviness, as though he was carrying burdens even she could not touch. Still, for Priscilla, those early days in Germany were magical. She was swept up in the wonder of it all, the attention, the affection, the thrill of being by his side. Their time together was filled with music, quiet conversations, and promises of a future that seemed too big to imagine. Decades later, as she sat with the letter in her hand, Priscilla realized Elvis had carried those memories too. In the letter, he had written about those first nights, about looking at her and wondering how he could hold on to her forever. She could barely breathe as she read those lines, because they pulled her back to the beginning, to a time when everything was fresh and unbroken. Her tears flowed freely as she understood that Elvis had never forgotten. But what else did he confess in that hidden message? The beginning was sweet, but the tone carried shadows. The further she read, the more she realized this letter was not only about their past, it was about everything that had come after, about the struggles, the silence, and the heartbreak that would follow. And so, her hands trembled once again as she turned to the next part, bracing herself to uncover the truths Elvis had hidden within his words. The marriage that shook the world. The year was 1967, and the world's eyes were on Las Vegas. On the first day of May, in the morning hours, Elvis Presley married Priscilla Presley at the Aladdin Hotel. News spread quickly, with photographs of the smiling couple splashed across front pages and television screens. For fans everywhere, it was a dream come true. America's golden boy had chosen his bride, and together they seemed like a royal pair. The wedding was carefully planned and tightly managed. There were only a handful of invited guests, mostly family and close friends. Yet, outside the walls of the hotel, hundreds of fans waited for a glimpse of the new couple. The ceremony was short but glamorous. Priscilla, in her long white gown and veil, looked like a fairy tale bride, while Elvis, dressed sharply in a black tuxedo, carried the aura of stardom that never left him. To the world, it looked perfect. He was the king of rock and roll, and she was his queen. Headlines around the globe announced the union with excitement. It was more than just a wedding, it was a cultural moment. Every photograph showed them smiling, hand in hand, their future appearing bright and untouchable. Yet, behind those pictures was a reality far more complicated than anyone could see. When the lights dimmed and the crowds dispersed, Priscilla entered a marriage unlike any other. Being married to Elvis meant living in a world of constant attention, endless travel, and the heavy demands of fame. The adoration of millions of fans was flattering, but it also brought temptations and distance. Elvis was surrounded by people at all times, musicians, friends, managers, and admirers who sought his attention. For Priscilla, it was a world where she often felt invisible. At first, she did her best to adapt. She was young, only 21, and willing to sacrifice much to be by his side. She gave up normal ambitions and the freedom to live like her peers. Instead, her life became centered on Elvis's needs, his schedule, and the public image they had to maintain. While she wore the title of wife to the most famous man in the world, she was not always treated as an equal partner. Behind closed doors, the struggles became clearer. Elvis's fame brought not only pressure, but also countless temptations. His world was filled with women who admired him, and while he often reassured Priscilla, the rumors and whispers were impossible to ignore. The distance between them grew quietly, masked by the glamour of their public appearances. Priscilla's inner world was full of conflict. On one hand, she loved Elvis deeply and wanted to support him. On the other, she often felt like an ornament, displayed beside him but rarely heard. She longed for a life where her voice mattered, where she could chase her own dreams. Instead, she found herself giving up friendships, independence, and even simple freedoms to fit into his life. Still, she tried to hold on, believing that love could outweigh the difficulties. She stood by him during the highs of his career and the private lows that only those closest to him saw. Yet deep inside, she knew she was fading into the background. Decades later, as she read the hidden letter, her heart broke when she came across Elvis's confession. In his own handwriting, he admitted that he had given her the world's stage, but never the peace she deserved. Those words cut through her. He had known all along what she had endured, the sacrifices she had made, and the pain she had kept hidden behind a composed smile. Her tears blurred the ink as she clutched the letter. The glamour of their wedding day had been a beautiful illusion, one the world had celebrated. But behind that golden image was a marriage full of silence, distance, and unspoken struggles. As she steadied herself to keep reading, Priscilla felt her breath catch. Elvis's words were about to take her deeper into the years that followed, years when the gap between them only widened. The letter was leading her into memories she had tried to bury, memories of nights spent alone while the world cheered for the man she could not always reach. The distance between them. The years after their wedding should have been filled with joy, but for Priscilla, they often felt like a slow unraveling. Elvis's career demanded everything from him: tours that stretched for months, endless film shoots in Hollywood, and eventually the grueling residencies in Las Vegas. The lights, the applause, and the fame never seemed to stop, but neither did the separation it created between them. Priscilla would often find herself waiting in their home at Graceland, the house quiet except for the sound of her own thoughts. While thousands of fans screamed for Elvis each night, she sat alone, wondering when he would come back, and if he would still truly see her when he did. The distance was not only physical, but also deeply emotional. Elvis, once attentive and loving, became harder to reach. There were nights when he was sweet and tender, moments when the man she had fallen in love with seemed to return. But those moments were fleeting. More often, he was withdrawn, consumed by the demands of his career and the weight of being who the world expected him to be. As the years went on, Elvis leaned heavily on pills. He took them to stay awake, to perform, to sleep, and to cope with the exhaustion of constant travel. For Priscilla, this only deepened the distance. His moods became unpredictable, and his presence, even when he was home, often felt far away. Priscilla's desperation grew. She longed for acknowledgement, for a place in his world that was more than just standing silently beside him. She wanted him to notice the sadness in her eyes, the loneliness that grew stronger with each passing day. She thought of leaving long before she ever did, though the idea tore at her heart. And then, as she read the hidden letter, the truth struck her harder than she could bear. Elvis had written that he saw the sadness in her eyes every night, but had been too much of a coward to admit he feared losing her. Those words brought her to her knees. She had believed for so long that he had not noticed, that he had been blind to her pain. Yet here it was, in his own writing, proof that he had seen everything. He had known her suffering, but had stayed silent out of fear. That silence had cost them both dearly. Her tears flowed freely as she clutched the letter tighter. The revelation was almost unbearable. He had been aware, yet he had chosen to keep the truth inside, letting the distance between them grow until it was too wide to cross. As Priscilla closed her eyes, the memories of those lonely nights came rushing back. The cheers of fans in faraway cities, the bright lights of Vegas, the countless people who surrounded Elvis while she waited in the shadows, every detail felt alive again. The letter had not only opened wounds, but also shown that Elvis had carried the same pain in his own heart. And still, there was more to read. She knew the next part of the letter would reveal not just what he saw, but what he truly felt in the years when their lives had begun to fall apart. Confessions in the letter. The letter grew heavier in Priscilla's hands as she read further. What had begun as reflections on their marriage now turned into something far more personal. For the first time, she saw Elvis Presley not as the man the world worshipped, but as a fragile soul who had carried fears he never dared to speak aloud. His words revealed a side of him that the public never imagined. To millions, he was the king of rock and roll, a figure larger than life, a man adored by crowds wherever he went. Yet in these handwritten lines, Elvis stripped away the crown. He admitted that deep inside, he did not always feel like enough for her. The stage lights gave him power, but in the quiet of their home, he often questioned whether he was truly the man she needed. He confessed that fame, rather than filling him, only made him feel emptier. Surrounded by applause and attention, he drowned in a sea of noise that could never silence the loneliness he carried. To escape it, he chased distractions, more concerts, more adoring women, more restless nights. Each indulgence was an attempt to push away the fear that one day Priscilla would see through him and realize he was not as strong as he pretended. Priscilla's hands trembled as she read those lines. The honesty pierced her heart. For years, she had lived believing Elvis had been blind to her pain. Now, through his words, she realized he had not only seen her suffering, but had also been fighting his own battles. The man who seemed untouchable had felt unworthy all along. The letter then shifted, carrying with it the weight of regret. Elvis admitted to betraying her trust. He acknowledged the choices that hurt her most, the rumors that had not been lies, and the moments when temptation had gotten the better of him. But woven through those confessions was a single, unshaken truth. He had never stopped loving her. No matter the mistakes, no matter the wandering, she had remained the center of his heart. Still, his words carried a haunting explanation. He wrote that he had feared confessing his insecurities directly to her. If he had told her how broken he felt, he believed she might have left him even sooner. So he kept silent, burying his feelings under layers of charm, music, and endless travel. That silence, unbroken for years, had been the true wall between them. As Priscilla continued to read, the tone of the letter grew darker. Elvis hinted at the loneliness that shadowed him, the nights when the cheering stopped and he found himself alone in empty hotel rooms. He confessed that there were moments when his thoughts wandered to places too painful to share. Sometimes, he wrote, I thought about writing a goodbye to the world. Priscilla froze at those words, her breath caught in her chest. He had written that she had unknowingly kept him from those thoughts becoming real. The memory of her laughter, the warmth of her presence, the way she carried light even in his darkest days, these things had kept him tethered when he felt like drifting away. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She felt anger rising within her anger, that he had never spoken these fears aloud, anger that he had chosen to suffer alone instead of leaning on her. And though the pain of his words cut deep, they also gave her something she had long needed understanding, yet there was still more to uncover. She could feel it in the way the letter shifted, the way his handwriting grew unsteady as the years moved closer to their separation. What would come next would be the story of life after their marriage ended, a chapter filled with both distance and connection. After the divorce, in 1973, their divorce became official. The world was shocked when Elvis Presley and Priscilla ended their marriage. But behind the headlines, both knew the separation had been long in the making. Yet even as husband and wife ended, their story did not. They walked out of the courthouse that day, hand in hand, a sign that, though their romantic bond had broken, their connection remained. They both knew they would forever share something far deeper than papers could erase their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. Life after the divorce took them in different directions, but their paths never fully parted. Priscilla found strength in building her own independence. She stepped into her own world, free to live outside of Elvis's shadow, yet still bound to him through the daughter they adored. She focused on raising Lisa Marie, ensuring she had stability despite the chaos of her father's fame. For Elvis, the years that followed grew heavier. His lifestyle, once filled with energy and triumph, began to crumble under the weight of exhaustion and dependency. He leaned more heavily on substances to keep performing, to keep up the image of the king that the world demanded. His health began to falter, his moods grew unpredictable, and the loneliness that had haunted him for years only deepened. Even so, Priscilla never stopped caring. She no longer stood as his wife, but she continued to watch over him with concern. She visited, checked in, and worried for the man who had once been her whole world. The distance between them was real, but the bond of shared love and history could not be erased. Her eyes blurred as she held the pages close. This was more than a letter. It was a final gift, a reminder that even when life had pulled them apart, Elvis's heart had remained with her. But as she turned to the last part of the letter, she felt a wave of dread. His words seemed to grow heavier, as if leading towards something final. The next chapter would take her into the shadow of his last years, and the heartbreak of a goodbye the world would never forget. The final days of Elvis. The world still remembers Elvis Presley as the dazzling figure who electrified stages, who could silence a crowd with one smile, who turned music into something unforgettable. To fans, he was larger than life, a man who seemed invincible, a legend carved in lights. Yet, as the 1970s drew to a close, the image the public adored no longer matched the private reality. Behind the stage lights, Elvis was frail, weary, and haunted by battles that very few truly saw. Priscilla Presley, though no longer his wife, saw glimpses of this hidden struggle whenever she visited him. To her, he was not just the king, but the boy she had met in Germany, the man who once whispered dreams to her in quiet rooms. That boy was still there, buried beneath layers of fame, exhaustion, and dependence on the substances that had become his crutch. When she looked at him, she sometimes caught a flash of the same sparkle in his eyes, but it faded quickly, replaced by the weight of all that had been demanded of him. By the mid-1970s, Elvis was performing grueling shows in Las Vegas, touring cities across America, and trying to maintain the magic that fans expected. The crowd still roared, the money still flowed, and his name was still on every marquee. But in the quiet moments backstage, his body and spirit were giving out. His health grew fragile, and his once energetic presence often gave way to long hours of solitude. Priscilla remembered how each visit left her torn. She wanted to hold on to the man who had once made her feel like the center of the universe, yet she could see how the years of pressure, heartbreak, and endless performing had hollowed him out. She described seeing both the boy she had loved and the man who was slipping away, as if the two lived inside him at once. It was during this period, many believe, that Elvis may have written the secret letter. The handwriting, unsteady and filled with raw emotion, suggested it had been written near the end of his life, when he was confronting the reality of his decline. The words carried an urgency that matched the sadness of those years. He seemed to know that time was not on his side. In the letter, Elvis confessed feelings that had never reached her ears while he was alive. He wrote about the emptiness of hotel rooms, the quiet that followed after the cheering stopped, and the fear that the end might come sooner than anyone expected. He admitted that if he did not make it, she needed to remember that he had never stopped needing her. Those words struck Priscilla with unbearable force. They were not just the words of a superstar, they were the words of a man stripped bare of his fame, whispering a final plea to the one person who had truly known him. When Priscilla reached this part of the letter, sitting decades later in the silence of her home, she broke down completely. Her body shook as she held the pages, her tears falling faster than she could wipe them away. Elvis had reached out, but the letter had never been sent. She realized, in that heartbreaking moment, that he had been trying to speak to her before it was too late. On August 16, 1977, the news spread across the globe. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was gone at the age of 42. Fans gathered outside Graceland in shock, holding candles, crying, singing his songs as if to keep him alive one more night. To the world, it was the loss of an icon. To Priscilla, it was the loss of the man she had once built her entire life around. She remembered the day she heard the news. Time seemed to stop, and grief hit her like a storm. Yet reading the letter decades later reopened those wounds, as if she were hearing it all for the first time again. The words he had written showed that he had been aware of his decline, that he had carried fears and regrets even as the world continued to cheer his name. Priscilla could see now that the letter was more than a confession. It was a farewell in disguise, a hidden attempt to prepare her for the unthinkable. Though he never sent it, though she only found it years later, it carried the truth of his final days. He had never stopped needing her, never stopped holding her in his heart, even when distance and silence had come between them. As she folded the letter carefully, her tears falling onto the faded ink, she felt both shattered and comforted. Shattered because the man she loved had suffered alone, comforted because his final thoughts had still been tied to her. The words connected the past to the present, reminding her that their story, though painful, had always been bound by love. The letter's timing, its confessions, and its haunting tone all tied back to the final days of Elvis Presley. A man who had been worshipped by millions, but who, at the end of his life, longed for something far simpler. The comfort of the woman he had first fallen for in Germany, the girl who had grown into the partner of his most meaningful years. For Priscilla, reading those words brought the realization that even though Elvis had left the world far too soon, his heart had never truly left hers.